The night was cold. The kind of cold that cuts right through your jacket and settles into your bones. Elena pulled her hoodie tighter as she walked through the back entrance of the Hartwell Grand Ballroom. She had never been inside a place like this before. The walls were covered in gold trim. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Everything sparkled. Everything looked expensive. Everything made her feel like she didn't belong. But she wasn't there to attend the party. She was there because of her mother. Her mother, Maria, had been working at this ballroom for almost 3 years now, cleaning floors, scrubbing toilets, polishing silverware until her hands cracked and bled. She worked double shifts most days, sometimes triple when they needed extra help for big events. Tonight was one of those nights. A charity gala for Manhattan's richest families. The kind of event where people wore watches that cost more than Elena's entire apartment building. Elena had gotten the call around 8 in the evening. Her mother had collapsed in the staff hallway. Exhaustion, they said. Dehydration. She had been working for 14 hours straight without a proper break. When Elena arrived, she found her mother lying on a small cot in the staff room, her face pale and her eyes barely open. A glass of water sat on the table beside her, untouched. "Mama," Elena whispered, kneeling beside her. "I'm here." Her mother managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, Mija. Just tired. Just need to rest for a few minutes." But Elena knew it was more than that. Her mother had been pushing herself too hard for too long. Ever since her father died 4 years ago, Maria had taken on the weight of the entire family. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Whatever it took to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Elena wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell someone that this wasn't fair, that her mother deserved better than this. But she stayed quiet. She held her mother's hand and waited. After about 20 minutes, a staff supervisor came in and told Elena she could wait in the hallway. They needed the room for other workers who were taking breaks. Elena didn't argue. She just nodded and stepped outside. The hallway was long and dimly lit, a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom she could hear in the distance. Music floated through the air. Soft piano melodies mixed with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Elena found herself drawn toward it, like a moth to a flame. She walked slowly, staying close to the walls, trying not to be seen. When she reached the edge of the main hall, she stopped and peeked through a gap in the service entrance. What she saw took her breath away. The ballroom was packed with people, men in perfectly tailored suits, women in gowns that seemed to shimmer with every movement. Waiters glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and tiny appetizers that probably cost more than Elena's weekly grocery budget. But it wasn't the people that caught her attention. It was the piano. In the center of the room, on a slightly raised platform, sat the most beautiful instrument Elena had ever seen. A Steinway grand piano, jet black and polished to perfection. A man in a tuxedo sat at the bench, his fingers dancing across the keys as he played something soft and elegant. Elena's heart ached. She hadn't touched a piano in over 2 years. Not since the old church in her neighborhood had closed down. That church had been her sanctuary. Every day after school, she would go there and practice on their worn-out upright piano. The keys were yellow, and some of them stuck. But to Elena, it was the most precious thing in the world, because that's where her father had taught her to play. Her father, Antonio, had been a concert pianist back in their home country. He had performed in grand halls, played for audiences who wept at his music, earned standing ovations that lasted for minutes. But when they immigrated to America, everything changed. His credentials weren't recognized. His accent made people dismiss him. He ended up working in a factory, his beautiful hands getting cut and calloused from manual labor. But he never stopped playing. And he never stopped teaching Elena. Every night, no matter how tired he was, he would sit with her at their tiny electric keyboard, the one with the broken keys that they had found at a thrift store. He would guide her hands, correct her posture, make her play the same passage over and over, until it was perfect. Music is a gift, Mija, he used to say. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It doesn't care where you come from. It only cares if you're true. If you play with your whole heart, people will listen. Elena believed him. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours. She learned Chopin and Beethoven and Mozart. She learned pieces that made her cry and pieces that made her want to dance. She dreamed of one day playing on a stage, wearing a beautiful dress, making her father proud. Then he got sick. The medical bills piled up faster than they could count. Her mother sold everything they had. The car, the furniture, even the little electric keyboard, because they needed every dollar they could get. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Antonio Vasquez died on a Tuesday morning in March. Elena was 13 years old. After that, the music stopped. There was no time for dreams anymore. There was only survival. Now, standing in the shadows of the Hartwell ballroom, Elena felt all of that come rushing back. The memories. The pain. She watched the pianist play, and her fingers twitched at her sides, muscle memory kicking in after all these years. She didn't realize how long she had been standing there until a voice made her jump. Well, what do we have here? Elena spun around to find a man standing behind her. He was tall, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His suit probably cost more than her mother earned in a year. In his hand, he held a glass of champagne, swirling it lazily as he looked her up and down. "Lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I think you might be in the wrong place. The soup kitchen is about 3 blocks south of here." A few people nearby heard him and chuckled. Elena felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. I'm waiting for my mother," she managed to say. "She works here." The man's eyebrows rose. "Ah, the help." He said the word, like it was something dirty. "And what exactly does your mother do?" "She's a cleaner." More chuckles from the small crowd that had gathered. The man nodded slowly, taking a sip of his champagne. "I see. And you just decided to wander into my event? To look at things you can't afford?" His event. Elena suddenly realized who she was talking to. This was Richard Hartwell, the owner of the ballroom, one of the richest men in New York City. She had seen his face in newspapers, always smiling next to politicians and celebrities. He wasn't smiling now. Well, he was, but it was a different kind of smile. The kind that made Elena feel small and worthless. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'll go back to the staff room." But as she turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "Wait." Elena froze. "You seem so fascinated by the piano," he said, gesturing toward the Steinway with his champagne glass. "Tell me, does someone from your background know anything about music? A church hymn, perhaps? Mary Had a Little Lamb." The laughter was louder now. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her. Smartphones were being pulled out. People sensed entertainment coming. Richard Hartwell stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Why don't you give us a little performance? Show us what the daughter of a cleaning lady can do." Elena looked at the piano. Then she looked back at Richard Hartwell, at his expensive suit and his cruel smile, and his champagne that cost more than her mother made in a week. And something inside her shifted. "Okay," she said. Richard's smirk faltered for just a moment. He clearly hadn't expected her to accept. But he recovered quickly, clapping his hands together with theatrical delight. "Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a volunteer." He led her toward the piano like she was a circus act, and Elena followed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change her life forever. The walk from the service entrance to the piano felt like the longest walk of Elena's life. Every step echoed in her ears. Every whisper from the crowd felt like a needle in her skin. She could hear them talking, not even trying to hide their words. "Is he serious right now? This is going to be hilarious. Someone record this. Poor thing. She looks terrified. Elena kept her eyes on the piano. That beautiful, gleaming Steinway that sat under the chandelier light like a throne, waiting for its queen. Except right now, everyone in this room expected her to fall flat on her face. They expected her to stumble through a few clumsy notes, turn red with embarrassment, and run away crying. That's what Richard Hartwell wanted. That's why he was doing this. Entertainment. That's all she was to him. A poor girl to be laughed at. The hired pianist, a young man with kind eyes and nervous hands, stood up from the bench as they approached. He looked at Elena with confusion, then at Richard Hartwell, then back at Elena. He clearly didn't understand what was happening. "Take a break, Vincent," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "We have a special guest performer tonight." Vincent hesitated. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe object to whatever cruel game was being played. But he was hired help, just like Elena's mother. He couldn't afford to make waves, so he simply nodded, gathered his sheet music, and stepped aside. Richard turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide like a ringmaster at a circus. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The ballroom gradually fell quiet. Conversations stopped. Champagne glasses paused, halfway to lips. All eyes turned toward the piano, toward the small figure in the worn hoodie standing beside one of the most expensive instruments in the city. "Tonight, we have an unexpected treat," Richard continued, his voice smooth and mocking. "This young lady is the daughter of one of our cleaning staff. She wandered into our event and expressed a deep fascination with our Steinway. So I thought, why not give her a chance to shine? After all, isn't that what charity is all about? Giving opportunities to the less fortunate?" Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. A few people looked uncomfortable, but most seemed amused. This was entertainment to them. A break from their boring small talk and business networking. Elena stood completely still. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that. No, they were shaking from something else. Something that had been buried deep inside her for 4 years. Anger. She thought about her mother, lying exhausted in that tiny staff room, working herself to the bone so people like Richard Hartwell could throw parties and drink champagne and make fun of people they considered beneath them. She thought about her father, who had given up his dreams so his family could have a better life, who had worked in a factory until his hands bled, but still came home every night to teach his daughter piano. She thought about all the times she had been looked down on, all the times people had assumed she was nothing because of where she came from, all the times she had stayed quiet and accepted it, because what else could she do? Not tonight. Tonight, she was going to speak, but not with words. "Well, go on then," Richard said, gesturing toward the piano with a smug smile. "Show us what you've got. We're all waiting." Elena walked to the bench and sat down. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her. The keys stretched out before her. 88 of them, black and white, perfectly arranged. She had dreamed of sitting at a piano like this, a real concert grand, the kind her father used to play before everything changed. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. The room was completely silent now. She could feel their stares, their phones pointed at her, their expectations of failure. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because when Elena closed her eyes, she wasn't in the Hartwell ballroom anymore. She was back in their tiny apartment, sitting next to her father on that broken keyboard. She could smell his cologne, feel his warm hand guiding hers, hear his gentle voice in her ear. "Play from here, Mija," he would say, touching her heart. "Not from here." He would tap her head. "The technique comes from practice. But the music, the real music, that comes from your soul. Let them hear who you are." Elena took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, like a question being asked in the darkness. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade. No, 1-inch G minor, one of the most difficult and emotionally complex pieces in the classical repertoire. Her father had made her learn it when she was 11. It had taken her almost 2 years to master. The notes floated through the air, delicate and haunting. A few people in the crowd shifted, their smirks starting to fade. This wasn't Mary, Had a Little Lamb. This wasn't some clumsy attempt at Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was something else entirely. Elena's fingers moved faster now, the melody building in intensity. The piece demanded everything from a pianist. Technical precision, emotional depth, complete surrender to the music. And Elena gave it all. She thought about her father as she played, the way he used to hum along when she practiced, the proud smile on his face when she finally got a difficult passage right, the tears in his eyes when he told her she had a gift, a real gift, and that one day the whole world would hear it. She thought about the day he died, how she had held his hand in that hospital room, the machines beeping around them, the smell of antiseptic burning her nose. How his last words to her were about music. Don't ever stop playing, Mija. Promise me. No matter what happens. Don't let them take it from you. She had broken that promise. For 4 years, she had let the music die. She had buried it, along with her father, convinced that part of her life was over. But sitting here now, on this beautiful piano, in front of all these people who expected nothing from her, Elena realized something. The music had never left. It had been waiting for this moment. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Not the mocking silence from before. A different kind of silence. The kind that happens when people forget to breathe. Richard Hartwell's smirk was gone. His champagne glass hung forgotten in his hand. His face had gone pale. His eyes wide with something that looked almost like shock. Around the room, people were lowering their phones. Not because they had stopped recording, but because they were too mesmerized to hold them steady. A woman in a red gown had tears streaming down her cheeks. An older gentleman had removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Vincent, the hired pianist, stood frozen near the edge of the platform. His mouth was slightly open, his expression a mixture of disbelief and awe. He had studied at Juilliard. He had played in concert halls across the country. And he knew, without a doubt, that what he was witnessing was something extraordinary. Elena was lost in the music now. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing out melodies that seemed to fill every corner of the massive ballroom. The piece built to its emotional peak, the notes crashing like waves against a shore, then pulling back into something soft and tender. She wasn't playing for Richard Hartwell. She wasn't playing for the crowd. She wasn't even playing for herself. She was playing for her father, for every sacrifice he had made, for every dream he had given up, for every night he had come home exhausted, but still sat down beside her to teach her piano, for the way he had believed in her, even when nobody else did. The final notes approached. Elena could feel tears on her own cheeks now, but she didn't care. She let them fall as her fingers found the last chord, holding it for a long moment before finally lifting her hands from the keys. The ballroom was silent. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. And then the room exploded. The applause hit Elena like a wave. It wasn't polite clapping. It wasn't the kind of applause you give because you're supposed to. This was something different. This was real. People were on their feet, hundreds of them. Men in expensive suits, women in designer gowns. People who had looked at her like she was nothing just minutes ago. Now they were standing, clapping, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Elena sat frozen at the piano bench. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to react. Maybe she had fallen asleep in the staff room next to her mother. Maybe none of this was real. But then she felt the tears on her own face, still wet and warm. She felt the smooth keys beneath her fingertips. She heard the thunder of applause echoing off the golden walls. This was real. This was happening. A woman in a silver gown rushed toward the piano, her hands pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold her heart inside. Tears streamed freely down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. But she didn't seem to care. "That was magnificent," she breathed, reaching out to touch Elena's shoulder. "Absolutely magnificent. I haven't heard Chopin played like that in 30 years. More people crowded around. They came from every direction, surrounding the piano platform, like Elena was some kind of celebrity. Questions flew at her from all sides. "Where did you study? Who is your teacher? How old are you? What's your name?" Elena couldn't process any of it. The attention was overwhelming. She had spent her whole life being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed. And now suddenly, everyone wanted to know her. Everyone wanted a piece of her. She looked around desperately, searching for a familiar face. And that's when she saw him. Richard Hartwell stood at the edge of the crowd, completely alone. His champagne glass was empty. His face had lost all its color. The smug smile that had seemed permanently attached to his lips was gone, replaced by something Elena couldn't quite read. Shock? Embarrassment? Fear? Their eyes met for just a moment. And in that moment, Elena saw something she had never expected to see in a man like Richard Hartwell. He looked small. The crowd continued to swirl around Elena, but she noticed that nobody was standing near Richard anymore. The same people who had laughed at his jokes just minutes ago, who had chuckled when he mocked her, were now keeping their distance. It was like he had some kind of disease they were afraid of catching. "Excuse me. Pardon me. Let me through, please." A strong, calm voice cut through the chaos. The crowd parted, and a woman stepped forward. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Her dark skin seemed to glow under the chandelier lights, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of experience and success. She walked straight up to Elena and extended her hand. "My name is Grace Okonkwo," she said. "I'm on the board of the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, and I would very much like to speak with you." Elena shook her hand, still feeling dazed. "I'm Elena. Elena Vasquez." "Elena." Grace smiled warmly. "That was one of the most extraordinary performances I have ever witnessed. And I have witnessed many. Do you have any formal training?" "My father taught me," Elena said quietly. "He was a concert pianist, back in our country." "And where is your father now?" Elena swallowed hard. "He passed away 4 years ago." Grace's expression softened. She reached out and took both of Elena's hands in hers. "I'm so sorry, my dear, but I want you to know something. Whatever your father taught you, whatever gift he passed down to you, it is extraordinary. You have something special, something rare, and I would hate to see it go to waste." She reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out a business card. It was simple and elegant, with gold lettering on cream-colored paper. "I want you to call me tomorrow," Grace said, pressing the card into Elena's palm. "We have a scholarship program at the conservatory. Full tuition, plus a living stipend. I think you would be a perfect candidate." Elena stared at the card. The words didn't seem real. Scholarship, full tuition, the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. These were things that happened to other people. Rich people, lucky people, not girls like her. I don't know what to say," Elena stammered. "You don't have to say anything right now," Grace replied. "Just promise me you'll call. Can you do that?" Elena nodded slowly. "Yes, I promise." Grace smiled again and squeezed her hands before stepping back into the crowd. But the chaos wasn't over. The hired pianist, Vincent, had finally pushed his way through the throng of people. He stood in front of Elena with an expression of pure amazement on his face. "I need to know," he said, his voice intense. "The Chopin Ballade, number 1 in G minor. One of the hardest pieces in the repertoire. I've been working on it for 2 years, and I still can't get the third movement right. How long did it take you to learn it?" Elena thought about it. About 2 years. But I haven't played it in almost 4 years. Not since. She trailed off. Vincent shook his head in disbelief. You haven't touched a piano in 4 years, and you just played that? From memory? Without warming up? I didn't really think about it, Elena admitted. That's insane, Vincent said, running a hand through his hair. That's absolutely insane. Do you understand how talented you are? Most people practice their entire lives and never play like that. You're 17. You haven't touched a piano in 4 years, and you just delivered a performance that would get a standing ovation at Carnegie Hall. Elena didn't know how to respond to that. She had never thought of herself as talented. She had just loved music. She had loved sitting next to her father, feeling his presence, sharing something beautiful with him. The practice had never felt like work. It had felt like breathing. Across the room, she noticed something happening. Richard Hartwell was surrounded by a small group of people now, but they weren't admirers. They were talking at him, not to him. Their faces were stern, disapproving. A woman who appeared to be his wife was speaking rapidly, her hand gestures sharp and angry. Elena caught fragments of the conversation as voices rose above the general noise. Completely humiliated yourself. The video is already everywhere. Do you have any idea how this looks? The video. Elena suddenly remembered all the smartphones that had been pointed at her. All the people who had been recording, expecting to capture her failure and embarrassment. Instead, they had captured something else entirely. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find a young woman with a press badge around her neck. Hi, I'm with the New York Arts Journal. Would you be willing to do a quick interview? Our readers would love to hear your story. Before Elena could answer, another reporter appeared. Then another. Then a man with a camera who said he was from a local news station. The questions started coming again, faster than before. How do you feel about what just happened? Did you know you were going to play tonight? What do you think about how Richard Hartwell treated you? Can you tell us about your father? Elena felt overwhelmed. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to see her mother. I'm sorry, she said, backing away from the crowd. I need to go. My mother is sick. I need to check on her. She turned and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the calls and questions that followed her. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was spinning. Everything had happened so fast, and she couldn't process any of it. She made her way back to the service hallway, away from the glittering lights and designer gowns and champagne glasses, back to the world she knew, the world of hard work and struggle and survival. When she reached the staff room, she found her mother sitting up on the cot. Maria's face was still pale, but her eyes were alert, and there were tears streaming down her cheeks. Mama? Elena rushed to her side. What's wrong? Are you okay? Her mother grabbed her hands and held them tight. Mija, she whispered, her voice breaking. One of the other workers. She showed me the video on her phone. She showed me what you did out there. Elena felt her own eyes filling with tears. Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Sorry? Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace. My beautiful girl. My talented, brave, beautiful girl. Your father would be so proud of you. So proud. They held each other in that small staff room, surrounded by mops and cleaning supplies and the smell of bleach. And for the first time in 4 years, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Elena woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing. It wouldn't stop. Notification after notification. She grabbed it from the small table next to her bed and squinted at the screen. Her heart nearly stopped. The video had gone viral. Not just a little viral. Massively. Impossibly. Life-changingly viral. Overnight, it had been shared millions of times. It was on every social media platform. News outlets were picking it up. Celebrity accounts were reposting it. The title that kept appearing again and again made Elena's stomach flip every time she saw it. Rich man mocks cleaning lady's daughter. Her piano response leaves everyone speechless. She scrolled through the comments with trembling fingers. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. And they were still coming in faster than she could read. I'm literally crying at my desk right now. This girl has more talent in her pinky finger than most people have in their whole body. The look on that rich guy's face when she started playing. Priceless. Known. Her father must be smiling down from heaven. Someone give this girl a record deal immediately. Elena put down her phone and stared at the ceiling of her tiny bedroom. The same ceiling she had stared at every night for years, with its water stains and peeling paint. Everything looked the same. But somehow, everything felt different. Her mother appeared in the doorway, still looking tired but better than the night before. She was holding her own phone, shaking her head in disbelief. Mija, my phone won't stop ringing. People from work are calling. Relatives from back home are calling. Everyone has seen the video. Everyone. Elena sat up slowly. I don't understand how this happened. The internet, her mother said with a small laugh. Your generation. You put everything online, and then it spreads like wildfire. They ate breakfast together in their small kitchen. Rice and eggs. The same thing they ate every morning, because it was cheap and filling. But today, the meal felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something had shifted in the universe. Elena's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Hello? Is this Elena Vasquez? A woman's voice. Professional and friendly. Yes, this is she. Elena, my name is Patricia Nguyen. I'm a producer at Good Morning America. We've seen the video of your performance last night, and we would love to have you on our show. We Guine. Would you be interested in doing an interview? Elena nearly dropped the phone. Good Morning America. One of the biggest morning shows in the country. They wanted to talk to her. Yes. I think so. Can I call you back? She wrote down the number with shaking hands. Before she could even process what had just happened, the phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from the New York Times. Then, someone from CNN. Then a producer from a popular podcast. Then a representative from a record label. By noon, Elena had received over 50 calls and messages from media outlets, talent agencies, and music industry professionals. Each one wanted a piece of her. Each one saw something in that video that they wanted to capture and share with the world. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about one call she hadn't made yet. She pulled out the business card that Grace Okonkwo had given her the night before. The gold lettering seemed to shimmer in the light from the window. Manhattan Conservatory of Music. Board of Directors. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. Grace answered on the second ring. Elena, I was hoping you would call. You said there was a scholarship program. Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you mean it? Is it real? Grace's warm laugh came through the phone. Of course it's real, my dear. And after what I witnessed last night, I've already spoken to the admissions committee. They would be honored to have you apply. In fact, they're prepared to expedite your application, if you're interested. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know what to say. This is all happening so fast. I understand. It's overwhelming. But Elena, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Grace's voice became serious. You have an extraordinary gift. A once-in-a-generation kind of gift. And gifts like that need to be nurtured. They need proper training and guidance. The conservatory can give you that. We can help you become the artist you were meant to be. Elena looked across the kitchen at her mother, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. She thought about her father, about all the sacrifices he had made, about his dream for her that had never died even when he did. Yes, Elena said. I want to apply. I want to learn. I want to do this the right way. While Elena's life was opening up with possibilities, Richard Hartwell's world was crumbling. The video hadn't just made Elena famous. It had made Richard infamous. The internet had a new villain, and they were not merciful. Within hours, the hashtag #HeartwellTheBully was trending nationwide. People were digging into his past, finding other incidents where he had mistreated employees or looked down on those he considered beneath him. Former workers came forward with stories of humiliation and abuse. Business partners distanced themselves publicly. By the afternoon, 2 major corporations had announced they were severing ties with Hartwell Enterprises. Stock prices dropped. Investors called emergency meetings. The board of directors demanded answers. Richard tried to do damage control. He released a statement through his publicist, claiming that the video had been taken out of context, that it was all meant to be good-natured fun. Nobody believed him. The video was clear. His words were clear. His smirk was clear. His wife, Helena, hadn't spoken to him since the gala. She had locked herself in their bedroom at their penthouse apartment, refusing to come out. Through the door, Richard could hear her on the phone with her lawyers. The worst part, the part that kept Richard up at night, was the image that he couldn't get out of his head. That girl, sitting at his piano, her eyes closed, her fingers on the keys, the music that had poured out of her like water from a broken dam. He had wanted to humiliate her. He had wanted to feel powerful by making her feel small. Instead, she had shown him, in front of everyone he knew, in front of the entire internet, exactly who the small one really was. Him. Back in Elena's apartment, the phone calls kept coming. But Elena had made a decision. She wasn't going to do every interview. She wasn't going to sign with the first record label that called. She wasn't going to let this moment sweep her away like a leaf in a storm. She was going to do what her father would have wanted. She was going to learn. She was going to grow. She was going to earn her place in the world of music through hard work and dedication, not just because of one viral video. She called Grace Okonkwo back and asked about the application process. She learned that she would need to audition to prove that her performance at the gala wasn't a fluke. She would need transcripts from her high school, letters of recommendation, a personal essay. "I'll do whatever it takes," Elena said. "I know you will," Grace replied. "I could see it in your eyes last night. You have the hunger, the drive. That's something that can't be taught." That evening, Elena sat by the window of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. Her mother had finally gone to bed, exhausted but happy. The phone had finally stopped buzzing. The world had finally gone quiet. She thought about how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been invisible. A poor girl with a sick mother and a dead father, and dreams that felt impossibly far away. Today, the whole world knew her name. But she knew this was just the beginning. The video had opened a door. But walking through that door, and everything that came after, that was up to her. She pulled out her phone and watched the video one more time. She watched herself walk to the piano. She watched Richard Hartwell's smug smile. She watched her own fingers touch the keys. And then she heard the music. Her music. Her father's music. The music that had been waiting inside her for 4 years. Just looking for a chance to come out. Tomorrow, she would start working on her conservatory application. Tomorrow, she would begin the next chapter of her life. But tonight, she just sat by the window, looking at the stars, and whispered 2 words into the darkness. "Thank you, Papa." 6 months had passed since that night at the Hartwell Ballroom. 6 months that felt like 6 years. Everything had changed. Everything. Except the things that mattered most. Elena stood backstage at Lincoln Center, one of the most famous concert halls in the world. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She was wearing a deep blue gown that flowed like water when she walked, the first formal dress she had ever owned. Her mother had cried when she saw her in it for the first time. "You look like a princess," Maria had said, tears streaming down her face. "No, you look like a queen." Tonight was Elena's debut performance as a scholarship student at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. Not a viral video. Not a surprise appearance at a rich man's party. A real concert. A real audience. People who had bought tickets specifically to hear her play. The past 6 months had been the hardest and most rewarding of Elena's life. The conservatory had accepted her application within 2 weeks of the gala. Grace Okonkwo had personally championed her case, calling her the most naturally gifted pianist she had encountered in 40 years of working in music education. But natural talent was just the beginning. Elena had to work harder than she ever had before. Hours of practice every day. Music theory classes that made her head spin. History of composition. Ear training. Performance technique. There were days when she felt like giving up. When the work seemed too hard and the other students seemed so much more prepared than her. But every time she wanted to quit, she thought of her father. She thought of all those nights in their tiny apartment, his patient voice guiding her through difficult passages. She thought of his hands, calloused from factory work, still gentle enough to coax beautiful music from broken keys. She couldn't give up. She had promised him she never would. The scholarship covered her tuition, but it also came with something unexpected. An anonymous donor had set up a trust fund for Elena's living expenses. Enough money for her and her mother to move out of their cramped apartment and into a small but comfortable place closer to the school. Enough for Maria to finally quit her second job and focus on her health. Elena had tried to find out who the donor was, but Grace just smiled and said some people preferred to do good quietly. Elena suspected Grace herself had something to do with it, but she never pushed. Some gifts were better left as mysteries. Her mother was in the audience tonight. 3rd row, center section. The best seat in the house. Maria had never been inside Lincoln Center before. She had walked through the grand entrance with wide eyes, touching the marble columns like she couldn't believe they were real. "Your father dreamed of playing here," Maria had whispered to Elena before the show. "Did you know that? When we first came to America, he used to walk past this building and imagine himself on that stage. He never got the chance. But now you're here. You're living his dream, Mija. You're living both of your dreams." Elena had hugged her mother tight and promised to make them both proud. Now, standing in the wings, she could hear the murmur of the audience settling into their seats. Over 800 people. Critics from major newspapers. Representatives from record labels. Nober Singh, fellow students and professors from the conservatory. And somewhere out there, Grace Okonkwo, the woman who had seen something special in a girl in a hoodie and given her a chance. A stagehand approached Elena with a gentle smile. 5 minutes, Miss Vasquez. Miss Vasquez. She still wasn't used to that. For most of her life, she had been invisible. Just another poor kid in a struggling neighborhood. Just another face in the crowd. Now people called her Miss Vasquez and asked for her autograph and told her she had changed their lives. The video had been viewed over 50 million times now. It had been featured on news programs around the world. It had sparked conversations about class, privilege, and the hidden talents that exist in every community. Elena had received thousands of messages from people who said her story had inspired them. Young people who had given up on their dreams. Parents who had sacrificed everything for their children. Musicians who had been told they weren't good enough. She tried to respond to as many as she could. Each message reminded her that this wasn't just about her anymore. She had become a symbol of something bigger. Hope. Perseverance. The belief that talent and hard work could overcome any obstacle, but she tried not to let it go to her head. She was still Elena. Still the girl who ate rice and eggs for breakfast. Still the girl who missed her father every single day. Still the girl who had so much to learn. Richard Hartwell's world had continued to collapse in the months since the gala. His wife had filed for divorce and taken half of everything. 3 more companies had cut ties with his business. He had been forced to sell several properties, including the Hartwell Ballroom itself. Elena had heard that he tried to apologize. He had reached out through intermediaries, offering money, offering to fund a music program in her name. offering anything that might help repair his shattered reputation. Elena had declined every offer. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his apology. She didn't want anything from him. The best revenge, her mother had told her, was living well. And Elena intended to live very well indeed. But she didn't hate him. That was the strange thing. When she thought about Richard Hartwell now, she didn't feel anger or resentment. She felt something closer to pity. He had spent his whole life measuring his worth by his wealth, looking down on anyone who had less than him. And in the end, what had it gotten him? Loneliness, disgrace, a legacy of cruelty that the internet would never let him forget. Elena had something he would never have. She had people who loved her. She had a gift that brought joy to others. She had a purpose that went beyond making money or impressing strangers at parties. She had music. The stagehand returned. It's time. Miss Vasquez. Elena took a deep breath. She smoothed the front of her gown. She thought of her father one last time, imagined him standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice in her ear. Play from here, Mija. Let them hear who you are. She walked onto the stage. The applause began before she even reached the piano. 800 people, rising to their feet, welcoming her, celebrating her. Elena smiled and gave a small bow, then made her way to the beautiful Steinway Grand that waited for her under the spotlight. She sat down on the bench. She looked out at the audience, finding her mother's face in the third row. Maria was already crying, her hands pressed together like she was praying. Elena gave her a small nod. Then she turned to the piano. The hall fell silent. 800 people held their breath. The lights dimmed until there was nothing but Elena, and the instrument, and the vast, waiting darkness. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The music filled Lincoln Center like sunlight filling a room. It poured from the piano and washed over the audience, touching something deep inside each person who heard it. Elena played with everything she had, all her joy, all her sorrow, all her gratitude, all her love. She played for her mother, who had sacrificed so much. She played for Grace, who had believed in her when no one else did. She played for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And most of all, she played for her father. For Antonio Vasquez, who had crossed an ocean with nothing but hope and a dream, who had given up his own chance at glory so his daughter might one day have hers, who had taught her that music was a language that needed no translation, a gift that could never be taken away. The final note hung in the air for a long moment, then silence, then an explosion of applause that seemed to shake the very walls of Lincoln Center. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at the ceiling, at the lights, at the stars she imagined beyond them. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I kept my promise." And somewhere, somehow, she knew he was listening. She knew he was proud. She knew that the music they had shared would live on forever, passed from his hands to hers. And one day, perhaps, to others who needed it just as much as she had. The applause continued. The audience cheered. And Elena Vasquez, daughter of a cleaning lady and a factory worker, stood on the stage of Lincoln Center and smiled. Her story was just beginning.